All right. And we're in. How are you doing today?
Doing great.
Thank you very much for your patience for my technical challenges, but we're getting there.
Good, good.
So, we've had this on the books for a while. I'm so glad you've been able to make it. You came down from the Bay Area. What's it like coming to the craziness of Los Angeles?
We think we have traffic where I am, but when you come to LA, you realize that everywhere else is great compared to here.
It's just because there's no public transportation
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, you have the metro now, but it doesn't go very far or
or go anywhere. I lived in China for 18 years, and of course, we had high speed trains that went everywhere, and it was a dream, right? And it's just like, why can't America get their shit together and learn how to build a train? But
it,
no.
that's true. I mean, even in the Bay Area, it's bus, BART, and train, and you have to be in the right place to go from one to the other, so it's not integrated very well.
But you're here in LA. We managed to work this all out, so I'm very thankful that you made it.
Me too.
And so your road from addiction to where you are today is what we are going to talk about, and I'm super excited to kind of understand that journey with you, and then also kind of understand where the science is at the moment around addiction and things like that. Because I think a lot of people out there are suffering and have been for years and decades. And I think one of the great things that COVID kind of did was maybe make people open up about some of the issues that they were dealing with because we were kind of all locked up at home. But I would love to kind of get into your story in a little bit, but maybe we can just get a little bit of background of like where you're from and how you grew up.
Yeah, so I grew up in Central Jersey and in a small town outside of Trenton, which is the capital. And, how did I grow up? Because it's interesting you said to talk about my story from addiction till now, but I always think it's important to start the story from the beginning because I think it helps for people to understand why someone would use drugs to excess as I did, starting in their teenage years and going on until they were 32. And so the pre-drug backstory gives context to the why of the using drugs at that level.
I agree. I think it's super interesting, like how people grow up leads to a lot of the issues that they have to deal with as an adult. So I think that's the best, you can't miss that part of the story.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And in fact, that's why the first third of my memoir is that part of the book because I want the context and to help people sort of really understand how it does happen.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So what was it like growing up in central New Jersey?
Well, I mean, Central New Jersey was fine in and of itself. That wasn't the real issue. It was really my immediate family that was the more the problem.
Yeah.
A lot of people in New Jersey do great. My family was not one of them.
Yeah. So did you did you have siblings? Did your parents stay together? What was that like?
Well, so things really started off problematic from the beginning, really from conception, because my mother was pregnant with me in 1961. She's unmarried, Irish Catholic, and it was a much, much bigger deal then than it would be today. And so that sort of started the first disruption.
Mhm.
And so the Catholic Church at the time had this system all set up to hide these pregnancies. And so my mother had to go out of town to give birth to me. And they were routing her letters through Boston, pretending she was there visiting someone to, cover everything up.
So there's like a whole infrastructure for women to have children out of wedlock.
Yes, the Catholic Church had a whole infrastructure. Exactly right. Exactly right.
That's terrifying.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there was the positive side, but there's, also the negative. But it was just much more of a social issue and viewed as a moral issue at the time. And so they were trying to have the women not have this sort of black mark on them forever if they didn't want it.
Mhm.
But in my particular instance, when my mother went home, my grandparents wouldn't let her bring me home, and she didn't give me up for adoption. So they had to do something with me.
Mhm.
And what they did was they put me, in a convent with the nuns, like, one town over, and so that's where I lived for the first 6 months of my life.
Wow. So I mean, was it like an orphanage or were you just living with nuns?
I was just living with nuns. It wasn't really an orphanage. I mean, I'm not sure if there were other babies there. In fact, when I was little, my sister was born by them. We would go visit those nuns, and I just thought all the little Catholic girls visited the nuns at the convent. And it wasn't until much later when I found out, well, no, actually, they took care of you for the first 6 months of your life. Yeah.
While your mom was trying to figure out how to like properly integrate you into the family?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's hard for me to really sort of understand exactly why she decided to not give me up because she really wasn't focused on mothering.
Mhm.
And in fact, even her version of events is that she visited me maybe once or twice a week when I was in the convent. So it's not like she was really hyper focused there. But she She did end up marrying the man who became my adoptive father and my sister's father, and so when I was 6 months old, I moved in with them, and that was sort of the solution to that. I really think from her point of view, she was trying to figure out I think she thought either my biological father would change his mind and marry her, and then when that didn't happen, she married my John, who she had been dating. So she was sort of seeing how things were gonna play out, I think is what really was going on.
Wow, that's like, that's a lot to have going on, as a young like, how old was your mother at that time? Do you mind?
She was 19, so she was young.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was 19.
That's so much to deal with at such a young age. Like, I'm always I'm a I guess, like, when I hear about, like, young people having children, they're it's either like a train wreck or they're just super switched on from a really young age, and it was just, like, the thing that they wanted to do, and, like, it was their calling, and they're gonna be great parents, and they are great parents, and then there's other people who just aren't ready for any of it.
No, and she wasn't ready, and I mean, even when I moved in with John and John was a nice guy, he was actually a nice man, and then she had my sister, and my sister's 2 years younger than I am. But, I mean, so there's the first 6 months where there's that sort of attachment disruption, right? And I'm sure that could have created some, challenges for me or emotional needs for me that might not have been there otherwise. But really, when I moved in with her, she still just wasn't ever focused on mothering. She just wasn't really interested in what we were doing or what we were thinking or what we were feeling. It was very, I mean, don't get me wrong. We were fed, we were clothed, we were taken to the doctor, we were taken to the dentist. I think she thought I'm doing these things, so therefore I'm doing my job.
Like a checklist, yeah.
Like a checklist. Well, and also, it was important for her that we looked good. So we were always in cute clothes. We always looked like a pretty family, going out. You see pictures of us and we're all dressed nice. And so that image was very important to her.
Yeah. The charade.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's really difficult. Like, I can't imagine. Like, has anyone ever done any psychological studies on, like, what happens to babies when the first 6 months of their lives, they're not being nursed by their mother or have the care or, like, sleeping with their mother? Because, like, that connection, that bond at the very beginning is supposed to be, like, from what I've read, crucial.
Well, there were those Romanian orphans, remember that they were, like, institutionalized and left in these facilities where they got very little touching, and that had a lot of attachment problems, right? They had problems bonding with people, they had problems with trust. In fact, my husband, when I first met him when we were dating, so that I reminded him of the monkeys whose mothers, abandoned them and they were left alone, like I reminded him of the monkeys whose mothers weren't there. And so there was definitely an impact, but I don't know if how much less it might have been if once I moved in with her, she would have been a different type of mother.
Yeah, like, healed that,
Correct,
yeah.
correct, correct. And so it's hard to know what was the first 6 months and what was the next, 20 years.
There's a few bumps along the road there, yeah.
It's hard to, filter it out. Yeah.
Yeah. And your sister was also, with the same, biological father as you, or with your stepfather?
So there's my biological father, and then John is I really think of him as my adoptive father, and then I do have a stepfather when I was 9. So there's 3 different fathers and yet kind of no fathers as we'll find out, but, Cindy's father was my adoptive father, and I thought he was my biological father. I was told, that he was I mean, it wasn't told like, "He's your biological father," it was just he was my dad. I grew up with him, and he's all I remembered, and Cindy was my sister, and that's how I viewed it. And like I said, he was a nice guy. He was low key, he was mellow, but he wasn't assertive and he wasn't really that hands-on, but he wasn't a problem. He was certainly of the 3 fathers, he was the best.
Yeah. I think it's really difficult, like, for step parents to come in and like and know how to parent other people's children. Like, I really feel like my generation, like, so I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the late 70s. I grew up in the 80s. And, like, I feel like my generation of parents, so, like, the people who were in their late 20s and early 30s during the 80s, I feel like they were, like, the most selfish, because I feel like a lot of my friends who I grew up with, all of our parents got divorced, mine included, right? And I feel like there was just this huge wave of divorces in the late 80s and early 90s. And then of course that brings on all these step parents coming in as people remarry, and it never is very smooth. Like, as a stepfather or a stepmother, it's like, how much do you discipline your better half's child, like, and what are the rules, and how is the what how is it supposed to how is the engagement supposed to work? And I think that can be really confusing.
That's true. Although with John, I was a baby. I was only 6 months old, and so that might be a little easier. It's not like I had a lot of ingrained patterns or, a conflict between him and some other father or something along those lines. I mean, sometimes the issues you're talking about can be loyalty issues or, the children are angry that the parents aren't together, but none of that was there because I was a little baby, and so that was a little bit easier. Now that those kind of themes might play more into when my mother married my stepfather when I was 9, but we can talk about that from a different angle.
Mhm.
But with John, I think it was just, this little baby, I mean, I was a little baby, he came in, and so, I don't I never felt so much that Cindy and I were treated differently until after they got divorced. Like, when I was little, I wasn't conscious of there being any difference in how he treated us.
Okay.
It was after they were divorced that the differences showed up.
Yeah, and he was probably more attentive to his biological daughter.
Yes, yes, he was, yeah, and then when I found out that he wasn't my biological father, it was like, "Oh, well, now I understand,"
How old were you when that happened?
Well, so the way it happened was was in freshman biology in high school.
Oh shit, that's a tough time.
And they asked and we had to do the blood typing for biology, and, my mother, I guess she didn't think twice about what the answer might be, but she gave me her real blood type, and I got the real blood type of John, and I did the test, and it doesn't match mine, like, that's impossible. That's impossible.
Right.
That's how I found out, and at the time, it was just like, "Oh, well, that explains a lot." And I didn't say anything because it didn't occur to me to say anything to my mother, and, we just didn't have that kind of relationship, and so she told me when I was on my way to college, so, like, 6 years later.
Wow.
But I mean, the fact that it never even occurred to me to mention it is sort of another indicator of the type of relationship I had with my mother.
Yeah, not a lot of like deep, meaningful conversations. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
no.
That's crazy though. Like that's like a so yeah, because doing blood tests in biology class in high school, and then I guess the equivalent of that today would be like doing like a 23 and
Yeah.
Me or some kind of DNA, so you can figure out your heritage, and then you find out your parents aren't actually your parents.
Exactly, exactly, and I will say I did, alter my blood type results because I didn't want my teacher to think I did the test wrong. Like, I didn't want him to think I didn't either want him to question me about it or think I made a mistake and I would get a bad grade, so I just altered the test results.
That's a lot of stress for a young person to have to deal with.
Yeah, I don't know, it's just like, to me, that was just the natural conclusion of what had just happened. That explains a lot, let me fix this on the paper so Mr. Fisher doesn't ask me any questions.
I mean, I guess like from the early descriptions, you kind of your mother at least grew up in a really Catholic community. So did you go to like Catholic school and stuff like that? Like,
No, so my mother left John when I was 6, and at the end they got divorced, and at the time, you got excommunicated when you got divorced, so she was, like, technically not allowed to be Catholic after a while. They changed the rule later, and I think they were allowed back in. So when I was little, we did go to church a bit. We would go to my grandmother's on Sunday and walk down to the church, and I did make my, communion and my confirmation, but we were never hyper focused on religion, and I'm not really religious now at all. I mean, atheist now. But so we went to church, we had sort of that semi participation, but it was never a deep relationship.
yeah, similar to me, I went to Catholic school as well, but it turned me more away from religion than towards religion.
That can happen.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you're a young teenager and you find out that your father, who you've been told is your father your whole life, is actually not your biological dad. And then when you're about to go to university, your mom says, "Hey, John, is your stepdad not your real dad?" And did she tell you the whole story, or did she just give you that little snippet?
She told me the story of what had happened, yeah. So I mean, my biological father, my mother was like a senior in high school and he was in college at a local college and they were dating. And by the time she found that she was pregnant, they had already broken up. So that wasn't good. And then there was a family meeting, his family and my family. And what my mother told me was that my bio dad's my grandfather, her father, sputtered out, "You're gonna ruin her life," and the family said, "Well, we're not gonna let her ruin his," or something, and that was the end of it. And so they just completely separated from me and cut us off, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And I mean, what was your relationship with your mother like after she told you that?
I mean, I pretended I didn't know. I didn't tell her the story about biology because it would just, create complication and there was no reason to complicate things. But it wasn't any different. I mean, it was just I don't really know why she told me when I was leaving. I'm not sure whether she was thinking back to when she was my age and thought maybe it was the right time. I don't know what her motivation was to tell me, but it was just literally a conversation on the airplane. We were going from New Jersey to California because I was coming here for college. But it didn't change anything, and we didn't really talk about it in any depth beyond that. I never brought it up again.
Yeah. She was probably having like a midlife crisis because I guess she would have been kind of like in her 40s or late 30s or something like that. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
So, I mean, so when did the substance abuse start for you then?
Well,
I mean, because I think that's when we're probably getting into it now or in those high school years.
there's a point to make before that though, which is my mother left John when I was 6, and then my sister and I lived with our great grandmother for 3 years. So my mother lived in an apartment, and John lived somewhere else. And again, we saw my mother once every week or two. We saw John maybe once every month or two, and we lived with our great grandmother. And my great grandmother, that was actually the calmest 3 years ever. She wasn't really emotionally engaged with us, but she didn't create chaos. She didn't create controversy. She took care of us. And then when I was 9, my mother married my stepfather, the one I call my stepfather, Alan, and we moved in with him. And that was when things got much worse. So my mother, pre-Alan, my mother was mostly, not emotionally connected, and she could be verbally aggressive. She got easily frustrated. She would yell. She could be emotional. One time I saw her, and she and John were fighting, and I looked out, and she was threatening to cut her wrist. I mean, she was very, she created a lot of chaos and a lot of energy and a lot of, emotion, outbursts. And she could be violent somewhat, but, was real, somewhat. But when I was 9, she married my stepfather, and we moved in, and my stepfather was very, very violent. He was very violent with my mother, and I think we underappreciate just what witnessing, parent-on-parent violence can do to kids, but he was also physically and sexually violent with me, and so that was a very high-stress household, so that's when things really escalated to a whole different level.
And sorry, so you were your mother and John got divorced at 6,
Yes.
and then you were with your great grandma for 3 years, so you would have been like 10ish at this
I
stage.
was 9 when we moved in with Alan, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, what was that living in a house like? I guess you would have been fearful all the time.
Yeah, I mean, at first I thought, okay, he has different rules, right? Like he had weird things like we weren't allowed to walk barefoot in the house. It's like, well, we had walked barefoot every summer of our life. Okay, fine. We're not allowed to walk barefoot, right? Or he didn't like us to call my mother she or refer to her as her or she. We had to say mom all the time. Okay, fine. So at first you're trying to think this is just a new person, like you were saying, figuring out what the relationship's going to be, what the new rules are going to be, who's going to set the new rules and all that. But within a relatively short period of time, it became obvious that his level of violence, first of all, was extreme, but also that what I did and what happened to me were not that closely connected.
Sure.
Like I could do the same thing 10 times, and 9 times he would pay no attention to it. And the 10th time, it was like the worst thing, anybody had ever done. And so then I started trying to develop strategies to reduce the risk. I started to realize I can't control it, but reduce it. Like my sister and I had to put the dishes away as a chore, when we got home from school. Well, sometimes he was sleeping. And so when he was sleeping and we put the dishes away, I taught my sister to do it one dish at a time so it didn't clack. And like I developed a special way for us to open the side door so it didn't bang the radiator or make noise. So I tried to, as the oldest sister, to develop techniques to try to reduce the risk. But it was unavoidable because what we did and how he responded were only tangentially connected. So there was a lot of stress. It was a lot of strain.
That's like a nightmare, like having to walk on eggshells.
Yes.
Yeah.
Walk on eggshells. You don't know when he's going to get out of control with our mother. You don't know when he's going to get out of control with us. And then sometimes he could be calm for weeks. I mean, so uh, it was very unpredictable. It was very unpredictable. But you could never trust the good times because you knew they weren't going to last.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot for like a 10-year-old and an early teenager to have to deal with.
Yes, it was a lot of strain. It was a
Yeah.
lot of strain. And then when I was like 11, he molested me, and then it was a lot of sexual threats all the time. He never actually did that again, but was always expecting it because he would say things to me or back me in a corner and threaten me. And so it was a high degree of stress. It was a high degree of strain. Yeah.
And your mother was in love with this man who was so violent and treating everyone so terribly, or like, did she try to get away or try to divorce him?
She did try to leave, twice. So I know she went to my grandparents, and my Aunt Catherine verified this because with my mom, she wasn't the most truthful person. So, but this thing, my Aunt Catherine verified that she did go to my grandparents at about 3 or 4 years into the marriage and told them what was going on. And they said, you've already been divorced once. You need to, like, go fix it. And so she did that. And
You need to stick this one out,
Y
basically.
you s or sh I think that I don't know that they understood the severity of the situation, exactly how much she told them, and maybe they thought, they knew that my mother could be chaotic and, create a lot of emotional intensity. Maybe they thought she was more at fault than she was admitting, which, is often true with my mother. So I don't know the full re but they didn't offer her help, they didn't offer her a way out. And then when I was around 13, we left. My sister and I came home from school, and there was a moving van in front of the house, and we were thrilled. We were racing home, excited, like, "All right, we're leaving, we're leaving." And we left, but see, this is the weird thing. She moved us literally a mile away. She says so we could go to the same school, but it's like, well, hiding from him was way more important than switching schools. But that's what she did.
Yeah, 1 mile's not even
No,
close to you enough. Yeah.
I know. I mean, we were afraid to play out front in the yard of the new place because we didn't want someone to see us, like it was like that. And she didn't tell us to do that, but we didn't want him to find us. And by then I also had a small brother. But anyway, that lasted about 2 or 3 weeks and then we were back. So,
Oh, wow.
and we lived with him until I left for college. She separated from him in my freshman year of college.
Okay. Wow. It's too bad she didn't do that a few years earlier.
Yeah, that would have been helpful.
So how did you handle all of that stress and all of that anxiety of just living in a home with that much fear and mistrust?
I mean, I had anx- sort of anxiety behaviors from a very young age. Even before that, even when we were living with John, I remember as far as back as I can remember, it's when I was 3 or 4. I had a lot of like counting behaviors. Like if you were talking and I was feeling stressed, I would count the syllables as you were talking, and I wanted it to end up on an odd number. And if it didn't, I would say something to make it end up on an odd number. And I used to have sort of soothing behaviors when I was trying to sleep. Like I had my fingers, they were all people to me. Like one was a fireman and a teacher and or a cat that could talk, and they would have conversations, and it was sort of to soothe myself to sleep. So, and then when Alan got bad, and I had my little baby brother. And again, I'm the oldest. I feel sort of this responsibility. I started developing sort of superstitious things like I had a comb and brush and mirror set. And if I was brushing my hair, because in those days you were supposed to brush your hair 100 strokes a night, so, but I had this superstitious belief that I had to put them back on my dresser in a certain order or something bad was going to happen to my brother. And sometimes I would realize in the middle that I hadn't done it right, and I would just like be paralyzed with fear. So those kind of things were going on even before Alan, but they got worse when I was living in the household.
What are those kinds of like scenarios or behaviors called? Is it like OCD, or is it like mixed with anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was anxiety, and it was on the border of OCD, and I think could have turned into OCD, but then I found drugs, and that's what it turned into instead. So,
So escapism.
yeah,
Yeah.
escapism. I mean, so I started doing my first drug when I was 12, which was alcohol. It was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill Wine, which some people know. It's like a sweet sort of entry level drug. And what I noticed about it was how much better it made me feel. I mean, it's sort of a two-pronged benefit. One is that the drugs push down the pain. They sort of make it more distant. I could feel more numb. Like I wasn't actively in the same emotional pain. On the other hand, they also made me feel happy in a sort of a more openly joyful way than I was used to feeling. And that's a hard, double benefit to resist when you're in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, it's hard to say no to that.
Yes, it's hard to say no to that. See, that's the thing that I don't think people always understand. In the beginning, the drugs work.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, they always seem to work until it gets out of control, right?
Yes, they work in the beginning, and so that and I mean, that caught my attention right away. Oh, wow. This is a really positive experience. I need more of this, and I started pursuing alcohol right from the get-go. I was even stealing beer from my stepfather. That's how much I wanted the alcohol. I even would take that risk,
Mhm.
and then I just escalated into other drugs fast.
Was there alcohol in the home? Like, were your mother and the stepfather also big drinkers? Or I'm just curious, like, whether it was readily available and easy, or whether you had to sneak out of the house and pay people at the local liquor store to go in and buy something for you.
My mother didn't drink very much, but my stepfather mostly drank beer, and he always had beer in the house, but he wouldn't drink every day. But if he was drinking, our risks were all higher if he was drinking.
Yeah.
So I had access to beer through him. I mean, there was like cases of beer down in the basement for parties or whatever, and so I could steal that beer. But it also wasn't hard to get alcohol. I mean, even at 12, I always looked older. I was tall. I matured early. So at 15, I'm hanging out with guys who are 18, 19. So alcohol was pretty easy to get.
Mhm.
And then other drugs were easy to get. I mean, I started doing weed pretty quickly after that. Pills were around. I did a lot of LSD my sophomore year of high school. And then when I
High
was
school.
high school,
Wow, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then when I was 16, I found what became my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine. And I was shooting meth within 6 months at 17 in full bore addiction when I graduated high school. So it was a very fast and deep escalation.
Wow, you went from doing, flavored wine to meth in like 4 years.
Yes, exactly right.
That is fast.
That is fast. That is fast.
And what was it about meth? I mean, because you'd have to assume, like, I'm just speaking off the cuff, like, these drugs are all expensive, right? Like, and I guess maybe alcohol is cheap or semi-cheap. Maybe weed is cheaper than alcohol at that stage. Maybe it is now for sure. But how hard was it to get meth? I guess this would have been what, in the 70s?
It would have been 77, and, in my part of the country, at least, in New Jersey, so methamphetamine was invented, I think, in the '20s, and it was around like, they were giving it to World War II pilots and things, the amphetamines, actually methamphetamine, but, at least in my area, it wasn't widely distributed until right at that time when I was 16 was the first sort of mass-produced wave of methamphetamine hitting my part of the country. And so it was like a big thing in the drug, with my drug group. And I grew up in a small town outside of Trenton. So, the drug, everybody knows who does drugs. You hang out, you do drugs, you hang out with the people who do drugs. And it was like, that's coming, it's coming, and it started to get more voluminous, more easier to access. And so it was easier to get meth than heroin at that point.
Oh, wow.
So it was everywhere. And it was also this mythology that, well, you don't do heroin because you could get addicted to that. But meth, yeah, meth is okay. Now, about a year later, people started to realize, so actually, many of us are struggling with it now. But in the beginning, it was not really, it didn't have that reputation. It didn't have the reputation. But for me, I was always ears open for any, whatever the next best time might be. I mean, that I was always hyper focused on any mention of a new drug, a better way to do drugs. Always that would capture my attention.
And what did that do to your schooling? I mean, like, you were attending school, you're 12, 13, 14. Well, the guys outside are a little noisy today. They're painting and they finish usually around this time. So we can blurt it out. But so you're experimenting with all these drugs. You're between 12 and 17, 18 years old. Like, I mean, how does that affect your schooling? Did you just stop going to school, or were you able to continue on with your education?
Yeah, and I wouldn't use the word experimenting at that point because I was always using everything to excess. I mean, even with the alcohol or weed or pills, people were always telling me, Mary Beth, you need to like slow down. But with school, I always had done well academically. Like school was always my special place where I got positive attention, where I wasn't just seen, I was seen um, and valued for things that were, that I was good at, that were part of my natural personality, my natural abilities. So school was always a very positive experience for me. And the drugs didn't really start affecting my ability to do my schoolwork or get to school until meth. And so when I started shooting meth at the end of summer before my senior year of high school, as senior year went on, I was less and less able to focus. And my second half of my senior year, I missed a lot of school. But you know how it is with college, they don't really see your second half of your senior year grades. You've already been accepted.
Right.
Also, I had been such a good student that even though I was missing a lot of class and missing work and missing tests, they always let me make it up because I had such a good track record up to that point. They believed me when I said there were problems at home and they just let me make up the work.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you had a good reputation going in.
Yes. Yes.
And just so everyone knows out there, and I'm a little bit naive about this as well, how do you shoot meth?
I mean, so you put methamphetamine is crystal, right? It's either a powder or crystal form, depending. And so you put it in a spoon and you put water on it, and then you crush it. You take the bottom part of the syringe, the white, you could pull it out. You crush it. You don't have to heat it up like you have to like you heat up heroin underneath the spoon. You're probably seeing on TVs or something. You don't have to do that with meth. You put a little bit of cotton in, draw it up in the syringe, tie off, and shoot up.
And right into your arm.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, right into your arm if you're lucky. I have terrible veins, so that was always a problem. But yes, yes, into your arm.
And I mean, you were in a small town outside of Trenton, but you would have been at a high school with what? How many kids? Like
158 in my graduating class.
a
So
big school.
I mean, 158. You're this is this that's fairly and that was Bordentown City, Bordentown Township, Fieldsboro, Wrightstown, and Cookstown to make up 158 in my
Okay.
graduating class. Yeah.
And I mean, how prevalent was meth at your high school? I guess that's more of where I was trying to go.
So, you know, like all drugs, most people that used meth, even when it was there, they would use it occasionally, right? Like they might use it once a month on the weekend at a party or something. But so it was easy to get if you wanted it, but most people use in moderation. The core group of us who used it on a regular basis, we were a much smaller group, and a fairly, close knit group.
Yeah.
But even in that group, I was always considered on the extreme end. Like honestly, my mother and my stepfather never said word one to me about was I using drugs, but the other people who were shooting meth like I was were telling me, Mary Beth, you need to go home and go to sleep. You've been up too long. So I started lying. And like if I would say things like, oh yeah, I just took a break. I took a week break, feeling good. To try to get the other drug users to get off my back.
Sure. Wow, that's crazy. Like, and you're a teenager.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was it? So what was it like graduating high school with this drug habit, and then I guess what realizing the freedom that you were going to move all the way across the country, which I guess still wasn't far enough.
Well, so I had been accepted to UCLA. I came here for 2 years and then I transferred to Berkeley and that's where I graduated from. But I was arrested a month before I was supposed to go to UCLA, a month to the day before my plane was going to take off to go to California for methamphetamine and hypodermics. And so I had to put college off for a year because I wasn't allowed to leave the state because I hadn't had my trial yet. But
You had to go to trial just for using drugs.
we ended up making a plea bargain. So it's a small town, and even though juvenile records are usually sealed, I mean, it's a small town. They knew I didn't have any kind of a prior record because it's a small town. And so my lawyer was able to make a deal with them, a very light deal. I actually only ended up having to plead guilty to a disorderly person offense, which isn't even a misdemeanor. It's like below a misdemeanor. And they let me go to college the next fall, even though I was still on probation. But also, what was really unusual about my sentencing order was that the judge said that if I wasn't arrested again for, I think it was 3 years, but it might have been 5, that I could get my record expunged. And so expunge means it's like erased, like it never happened. And normally you have to go through this whole process. Please, please let me expunge my record. But I didn't have to do that because it was in my sentencing order. I just had to say it's been 3 years or 5 years or whatever. I haven't been arrested again. Expunge my record, and they did.
But did that scare you to go clean, or were you still using?
I was still using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't scare you at all.
Um, it it didn't scare. I mean, I wasn't happy about it.
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
It also meant that my mother and my stepfather knew I was using meth, right? Like that's how they found out is that I got arrested. So that was a problem. And I will say in my mother's defense, for all her lack of mothering often, she did actually get me a psychiatrist to go see. And I think partly the lawyer said we need her in, therapy or something. And so I did go see a psychiatrist at Princeton University, which wasn't far from where I was, but he was not an expert in addiction. I didn't know that, but I can tell now based on what he did. And he just basically said, you're depressed. If we properly medicate you, you'll stop needing to use these drugs, and gave me antidepressants, which didn't work. And I was using meth at the same time anyway. So that sort of went nowhere.
Just hook you on another drug.
Yeah. And he kept raising the dose because it wasn't working. And then it's like, well, yeah, so, but I went off. Um, but I did go to him, but it wasn't like a lot of talk therapy or anything. It was pretty short visits and really medication focused.
Psychiatry and therapy and stuff like that has really come a long way in the last like decade or so. But I reckon in the late 70s and early 80s, like no one had any idea about like childhood abuse and childhood behaviors and then also like addiction. Like people just didn't get their heads around what's really going on with addiction and how it can affect young people.
Yeah, I don't think I think you're right. I think I told him maybe not the true whole story, but at least enough of the story that he, was clear. And he didn't really get the connection. Like I don't remember him asking me about my childhood or where it came from or anything. Because when I did therapy for real, which was after rehab, after I got sober, when I was which was would have been in the early 90s, it was a very different experience when I started therapy at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you got busted for doing meth, and you got a lenient sentence. You put off university for a year, then you come out to UCLA. And did you use that as like a fresh start? Like, did you stop using drugs?
I mean, I definitely thought this is my chance to get away from the violence, right? Because I had some violent episodes outside with, men as well. So I thought, okay, this is like my break. I'm going to, go to California and start over. And I did do better and better with the drugs for the first 3.5 years. And I will emphasize that better and good are not the same word. Okay. But it was better. So for those first 3.5 years, I used more alcohol, some pills, some hallucinogens, occasionally cocaine, which was new to me, but not really meth very often. And I mostly used on the weekend, but sometimes it would roll into the week, but also still very chaotically, like always using to excess when I was using. If I was drinking a lot. I would, do things like hang out the window and, or just a lot of crazy behaviors, but it was an improvement. And I was going to school and I was working part time and I was sort of keeping my life together to a certain degree. But during college, I had a really life threatening kidnapping, 3 men, 6 hours, raped by all of them. Thought I really didn't think I was going to survive it. And then I moved in with a violent boyfriend. And so it was sort of like the little bit of grip I had, I lost. And in January of my senior year of college, I started using meth again on a regular basis.
Wow, you were kidnapped and raped. How? I mean, was it like a random attack, or
Yes, it was random. Yes.
no one was like stalking you or anything like that? Or
No,
oh,
no, no, it was random. And it wasn't anyone that I know. I mean, in college, a lot of sexual assaults are from people that you know, and
yeah.
this wasn't people that I knew.
Wow, that's terrible. And then went right out of that into a abusive relationship,
Yes,
and then right back on meth.
yes. That's pretty much how it played out, yeah.
Jeez, that's terrible.
I know, but it's also not that uncommon, right? I mean, sexual assault in college is unfortunately fairly common, and women who have abuse histories in childhood, it's not uncommon to pick an abusive partner. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it, but partly like he also had been abused in his childhood by his father, and there's that sort of like y- sort of trauma bond, understanding, you know what I mean, of each other. And also, he wasn't as bad as my stepfather. And so, to what would be shocking to somebody else was sort of like, I wasn't happy about it. And I did eventually leave him, but it wasn't at the same level of what I grew up with. And so, it wasn't quite the same shock that it would have been to someone who didn't have that childhood history.
So you guys kind of bonded over your shared trauma.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he was also very emotionally, intense and created a lot of chaos and that was how I grew up, and there was a there's sort of an endorphin rush, a dopamine, rush from that kind of intensity, and it's what I was used to live at that level of chaos and insanity, and who knows what's gonna happen next, and so it was familiar.
That kind of like became your comfort zone.
Yeah, in a way, it was familiar. In fact, when I first was with my now husband, who's much like a quiet guy, it took him I kept pushing him to try to get him to react because I didn't understand, like, what he was offering me, this sort of, like, quiet, supportive love. I did not comprehend what that was. I thought, "Well, he can't really care if he's not engaging?" So it took me a long time to learn to appreciate what is actually real love, because that's just not what I knew.
And so after your kidnapping experience, you hooked up with you kind of cohabitated with this boyfriend that was abusive. Was he also a drug user?
He was a drug user, and he was really an alcoholic, and yeah, he was a drug user. In fact, he was a bad drug user. Like, we would if we were doing drugs with him, we would put half out to share, and the other half, the rest of us would share because he couldn't be trusted. 'Cause he was very volatile. But yes, he was a drug user, but alcohol was his biggest problem. And alcohol is a drug, just to clarify. I don't mean to say alcohol is not. Whenever I say drugs, I always mean including alcohol, but alcohol is his drug of choice.
Alcohol is the most terrifying drug of them all, I think.
Alcohol is still the number one abused drug in America. Despite the overdose epidemic, it's still the number one killer,
Yeah.
except for cigarettes.
I reference that quite a bit because I and people might laugh about this, but obviously Hunter Biden has had a lot of trials and tribulations in the media over the last few years, and he came out on an interview maybe like 3 or 4 months ago saying about, and he was talking about all the different drugs he's done, and he goes, by far the most dangerous drug I've ever touched was alcohol.
Well, and that's why people think that somehow alcohol is not as big of a problem because it's legal. And if it it's not the least harmful drug, that's why it's legal. It's legal for historical reasons, for traditional reasons. It's not legal because we did an analysis and said, well, this one's not as bad as the others, so let's make it legal. That's not the way it is. In fact, there's a strong argument that alcohol is much more problematic on multiple levels than cannabis. So
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been following. So just a little bit of background about me. Like I've lived abroad. I was born in Toronto, Canada, but I lived abroad from the age of 22 till now. I still haven't been back to Canada really, but I've only been now in North America for about 2 years in LA. But before that, I lived in China for about 18 years, and then I was in Dubai and then Switzerland for a little bit. So I kind of bounced around, and I was always following like this legal cannabis movement, and I was never very interested in cannabis. But then I started looking, and started catching the news and figuring out how they were spinning the news and stuff like that, and I started to figure out that the states that legalized cannabis saw a reduction in alcohol sales, reduction in pharmaceutical sales for antidepressants and stuff like that, and a reduction in psychiatry and therapy hours per month. And when cannabis went up, all these other things went down. And some people might say that's good. Some people say that's bad, but it is. And that's actually why a lot of states in the U.S. have not fully legalized cannabis and cannabis products yet, because they're protecting the alcohol, the pharmaceutical, and the therapy industries, because they don't want those numbers to go down. So I thought that was interesting.
that is interesting. I mean, the alcohol level, especially among people under 30, has definitely dropped. It's at the lowest level since they've been keeping records. And the cannabis level has gone up, but it hasn't gone up. But the alcohol level has dropped more than the cannabis level has gone up. So in general, people under 30 are using fewer substances than prior generations, but still, I mean, still, some people will develop a problem. The other thing about cannabis is we didn't have a good data on what cannabis's risks were because for decades they weren't allowed to do studies. The U.S. government prevented them from doing research on cannabis, and so it was all sort of word of mouth and anecdotal. And at first, it was as if cannabis had no risk, and now we know. And for me, I actually don't care if people do drugs, and but I want them to know the real risks, like not the exaggerated risks, but also not the minimized risks. And so we know now today that cannabis does have some risk, and for certain groups, higher risk than others. But if still, it's most based on the data we have today, it's less risky than alcohol and less risky than a lot of other drugs. And so it's just important to know what the real risks are so that you can make an informed decision.
Absolutely. So you were saying like you started with alcohol, You started then, with cannabis, maybe heroin, and then meth. So is meth an upper or downer?
Stimulant. Upper.
Yeah. So you were taking a whole spectrum of drugs to go up and down and left and right and the whole thing.
Yeah, but what's interesting is, so once I found meth, my terminology is I was very committed to meth. Like I was very that it was the drug that clicked the best for me. So before that, I sort of floated from drug to drug. I knew what was around, but when I found meth, that's what I really wanted. I stopped doing the other drugs to a large degree, unless somehow I couldn't get meth. I mean, I didn't drink very much when I was using meth or anything else. And it's interesting because, as you can tell, I'm sort of naturally a high energy person. And you would think the opiates would have been the most attractive to me because they would calm me down. But for whatever biochemical reason, meth's the one that just clicked in, my brain the best, and the one that fit me the best, and the one that once I found it, that I pursued the hardest.
Wow. So back to schooling. So your senior year, you get back on meth. You've had a really traumatic experience with the kidnapping, and now with your live-in boyfriend, and you're back on meth. And by this stage, you're in Berkeley.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was it like that senior year? How traumatic was that?
Uh, you know, so I started using meth again in January of my senior year. And I will say, for the first, couple months, it was great. But like, it's meth, and I didn't do it, in moderation, right? I did it as much as I could. And so I started having the same problems, physical problems, started missing some school. But again, I was almost graduated. It didn't really impact my grades. I was so close to the end. But what it did impact was that I had been accepted to go to Berkeley Law for the fall. Well, the fall is like 8 months after January, right? And so by the time I get to Berkeley Law School 8 months later, I'm in no shape to do it. I mean, I'm really strung out. Literally, how you have those nightmares where you wake up and in your dream, and you haven't been to class, and there's a test, that day. Like I would literally miss weeks of class. I mean, I was not going to school. I couldn't concentrate. I gave back a top 10 law school because of my addiction. I withdrew because I knew I would never finish. Like, I was never going to finish. I was probably going to end up, failing out because I wasn't able to do it.
What does a meth addiction of that level look like? Are you like waking up in the morning and taking meth right away? Like how many like hits are you taking a day? And then are you even able to like leave the house and be functional?
So it depends. For me, most people do what are called runs, like, so how many days are you going to stay up? It's not like you do it, you go to sleep every day. You don't go to sleep every day. So for me, the typical pattern at that time would have been that I would stay up for 3 days, 3 full days and nights, and then I would crash. And then when I woke up, I would really have to, especially if I was trying to go to school or something, I had to get high because I was so far behind on my sleep, and I was really exhausted and fatigued, and you're not eating right, you're not taking care of yourself. I mean, just to get out the door, I'd have to use. If I didn't want to use, I couldn't really go anywhere for the first, 2 or 3 days because I would be so exhausted and crashing.
And that 3-day period where you would stay awake, like, are you able to function in society, or are you kind of in your house, like, just kind of in your own head?
I mean, the first day or two, it depends on what you mean by function. Like, so let's say after I stopped going to law school and I was trying to work. Okay. So I would go to work, high sometimes, and the earlier in the period, the better I would be. Like, the first day at work, I'm gonna actually be productive. I'm gonna get a lot done.
Yeah.
Not that first day. I might even stay overtime and just keep on working for a while.
This is a theme, by the way. Hey,
But by the second day and the third day, even if I'm sitting there, I'm not getting much done because my concentration is low. I'm easily distracted. I'm thinking about other things. I'm going out to smoke a cigarette 22 times, so less and less productive. So it's that sort of a pattern. But then when I'm in the midst of the really many months of a run or many years of a run, there really isn't any like high productive time anymore. It's more just how do I do anything? How do I even get dressed or leave the house? I want to have to get high.
or like get groceries, or see a friend or something like that. Like, because as someone who hasn't dealt with maybe that level of addiction, like it's a, yeah, it's a total mystery to me. Like how you even function.
Well, it was very unreliable as a friend, right? Because if you called and I was in the right headspace at the right, part of my high cycle, I could actually talk to you and help you. But if you needed me when I'm in the wrong place, I'm not going to answer the phone. I'm not going to be able to get back to you. If I said I was coming to your birthday party, probably a 1 out of 3 chance that I would show up because if I was too strung out, I wouldn't want people to see me. And if I was too high, might not want to go because it's going to interfere with me getting high. And so I was not a reliable friend. No, other drug people understand these things and we accommodate each other in these ways. Our expectations are reasonable about our other drug using friends. But to normies, to people who aren't there, it looks like very unpredictable, unreliable behavior often.
So you get into Berkeley Law, which is incredible given your drug using past, and then you have to did you were you able to postpone a year, or did you have to just omit yourself from that entire program?
I withdrew and then I tried to go back one time, but I was in the same place that I was and I withdrew again. And then I knew that it's just pointless. I mean, I can't do it.
Was that a wake up call for you? Like, holy shit, like this is my life. I need to like sort it out, or were you just using and then not even caring?
It wasn't a wake-up call, but it was agonizing because I knew what I was giving up, and I knew it was because of my addiction. Like, there was no even to myself, I couldn't hide the reason that that was why. I mean, I hated driving by that building, like, afterward, I didn't wanna go "Let's drive around this way." I don't wanna go that way. It was a very painful loss. It was a very painful loss, but it didn't cause me to question, to think, "Well, maybe that means I need to stop getting high."
Right, that was
No,
what I was getting at.
I did not go from A to B in that way, no.
Yeah. You had to take a few more steps along the way.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
Another 10 years.
Wow, 10 more years after graduating.
Yes.
Yeah. And did you stay in the Bay Area?
Yes.
So for people like me, who's a little bit younger, like we always hear these mystical stories of San Francisco and the Bay Area and drug use in the 80s and 70s and stuff like that. Like, was it really like that? I mean, were you part of, the scene at Berkeley that of people using drugs and I mean, I guess I'm just curious, like how prevalent was it? Because looking back from when I was in university, people talked about the 70s and in the 80s in the Bay Area, like everyone was just on drugs all the time. Was that kind of true or?
No, I mean, Berkeley students are very academically focused. Certainly, a lot of people did alcohol, and a lot of people got in some trouble with alcohol, DUIs, or actually, overdosing. Things that fraternities or sororities, problem behaviors, right? Certainly, a lot of people smoked weed. That was common. Nobody thought anything of it. It was considered the equivalent of alcohol. And a lot of people did other things, but they did them, once in a while, here and there, not on a regular basis. The, you know, it's the 10 to 20% of the group that does drugs that end up with problem drug use, right? And once you're in that group, again, you're attracted to each other. You recognize each other, you know each other, you meet each other through each other's friends. You become sort of your own little subculture. You don't People who don't use drugs like you do aren't people you really want to be around when you're getting high because they're going to look at you like you're crazy or they're not going to be comfortable. And so it's much more comfortable to be around people that are at your level. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't want to be judged.
You don't want to be judged, but it's like there's just such a shorthand understanding. Like, one drug addict to another will say something and laugh about it, which would sound crazy to an outsider, but to us it's just like, well, that's just the way it was. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So
So somehow you managed to graduate Berkeley University with a really major drug problem. And
yes.
I mean, then what does life look like after school? Like you gotta get a job and get a house and start like taking baby steps into adulthood. I mean, how hard was that leap?
Well, you know how after college you're supposed to start working your way up the corporate ladder? Well, I spent 10 years working my way down that corporate ladder because I couldn't hold a job because I was, using meth all the time. So every job for those 10 years would be sort of less money and less responsibility. And I held it for less and less time. And so by the time I was 32, right before I went into rehab, my last job was word processing, and I could only hold it for 9 months. Like, that's where I was professionally. And that's just indicator of where I wasn't always, that I was just on a downhill slide. Things were getting worse and worse and worse. It was a tough 10 years.
And I mean, these were, I mean, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have work from home, we didn't have Zoom and all this other shit. Like you would have been going into an office every day.
Yes.
And how hard was that with a drug problem?
I didn't go every day. I mean, so I had a lot of like excuses that I had sort of a list of excuses. And every time I got a new job, I would run through those excuses again. It was very difficult for me. I would miss a lot of days. I would leave early. I would get in late. A lot of days I wasn't that productive. Some days I might be, but not on a regular basis. And so people would look at my Berkeley degree and my good grades, and it would take them a while to realize what they were actually getting from me. And then, I get put on a performance plan or something, and then I'd eventually lose the job because I couldn't meet the minimum, requirements of any job at that point.
Because on paper, you look quite good.
Yes, I said that my resume started getting worse and worse and worse, right? And so I had this sort of stretch time frames on my resume, or leave jobs off that only lasted 3 or 4 months. So by the time I got sober at 32, my resume was a mess. I mean, my work history was embarrassing. It was
Mm.
embarrassing.
Were there any other kind of major low points in that 10-year period, like where before you were able to quit that you wanted to kind of talk about?
I mean, it was just sort of by 32, there's just a physical and emotional and mental wearing down. Like by 32, I am having physical problems. I'm starting to, that's a very toxic drug. It's starting to really show up. I
How does that happen? Sorry to interrupt you, but how does meth wear and tear on your body?
So you're not eating right, you're not sleeping, right? So your immune system is really shot. And so I got sick really easily. And when I got sick, things would last for a long time. And I was never really well. Like I was really always some version of unwell. And I would often look, unwell. I was getting abscesses a lot from when I was shooting meth because again, infections start because my immune system can't fight back. And I'm just feeling emotionally just, more debilitated, in more despair, feeling more trapped, and miserable, but also not really believing that there's a way out. And so, I mean, for me, a lot of what kept me stuck was that I really thought because of and we've only talked about some of my like sexual assaults or outside experiences, but because of my sort of deep and wide and from a very early age trauma history, I really thought I had like three choices. I can use drugs, I can commit suicide, or I'm going to end up institutionalized in a mental health facility. Like I really thought those were my options. I didn't understand that you could heal from trauma. I didn't understand that you could recover from addiction. I really just thought, my life's going to be miserable. I tried to find ways to make it a little less miserable. Like at times I try to control my drug use. I try to, a new pattern. Okay, I'll use for 3 days and then I won't use for four. Like I want to use from Friday to Sunday, sleep Sunday night, go to work next Friday, or I'll skip a weekend. Like I try all these different patterns, and for maybe do them for a month or two, and then I couldn't maintain it. And so there's like this struggle going on of trying to find a pattern that works because I didn't believe that stopping was an option. So I was trying to just make my life less chaotic, my using not quite as bad. That was sort of like the extent of my imagination was, let's just try to figure out how to live with this.
So, so I've done a little bit of research about this in the past. I used to work for the New York Times in China, so we did a story once on heroin addiction in China, which was actually a big deal, but they don't like to talk about it. So we did a story about it way back in the day. And heroin is actually, from what I understand, really dangerous when you come off of it. And if you come off of it too quickly, you can actually do more damage to yourself than if you stay on it, or roughly. So they use methadone, right, to help like wean people off of. And we actually went to a methadone clinic in China and stuff like that. So what's the methadone equivalent of meth? Like if you're coming off meth and you said like, you try to use for 3 days, then not use for 4 days, are you having like physical ailments and like psychological issues as you're trying to come off of it or trying to recalibrate your relationship with it?
So there's isn't the same painful physical withdrawal that you have when you get off of opiates. So when you withdraw from opiates, it's actually you get nausea, you get a lot of body aches, you're in pain. I mean, it's a painful process to go through a withdrawal from opiates, which is why a lot of people have to do what's called medically supervised withdrawal so that they're helped. Same with alcohol. You can actually die from alcohol withdrawal. For meth, there you don't have that kind of physiological response. It's more of a mental and emotional sort of withdrawal. I mean, you're going to crash. You stop using meth, you're going to crash. You're going to sleep. That could last for a long time. You're going to feel very irritable, unfocused, probably angry, acting out, inability to concentrate. So it's going to be those kind of things, not so much the physical withdrawal. But as far as the methadone question goes, so methadone and buprenorphine is the other um, opiate replacement drug. It's called medication for opioid use disorder.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at.
Use disorder is the medical name for addiction. That those medications are often used as a short-term transitional drug to sobriety, but not for everyone. Some people need to be on them for many, many years, and some need to be on them for the rest of their lives. But there is currently no medication equivalent. I mean, there is for alcohol as well. Alcohol has drugs that you can use for alcohol. But there is no such drug that's FDA approved for stimulants. There are currently drugs that are under investigation, and there are some drugs that are being used off label, but none of them have this sort of positive data that methadone and buprenorphine have. So for example, methadone and buprenorphine reduce the risk of fatal overdose by 60% if people are on it. That's very, very strong positive data. There's nothing like that for stimulants.
Okay. Wow. It's a crazy world. So using kind of your words and your timeline, you're 10 years after university, you kind of hit rock bottom.
Yeah, although I will emphasize, we don't encourage that rock bottom idea anymore. It is untrue that you have to have a horrible rock bottom before you get sober. Okay, we just want that clearly on the table.
They always use that in the movies.
I know. But today we talk. See, and I've been sober now 31 years, since I got sober in '94.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. No, I mean it's a big deal. It is a big deal. But what were we talking about?
Just the rock bottom,
Oh, yes,
and you're not using
thank
that
you.
terminology.
So when I got sober, they told us that basically that we didn't know what day it happened, but one day we crossed this invisible line from drug abuser to drug addict. But that's not the conceptualization today. Today, substance use disorder, addiction, is categorized as a mental health disorder, right? It's in the diagnostic manual. But it's also viewed like all mental health disorders on a spectrum, mild, moderate, or severe. So just like you could have mild, moderate, or severe anxiety, or mild, moderate, or severe depression, you can have mild, moderate, or severe addiction, substance use disorder. So today we try to focus on let's disrupt this problem at the mild or moderate level and not wait till you get very severe. However, for me, if I take that current DSM test as if it was the day before I went to rehab, I would end up on the very severe level and I had to get sober. But I just want to make sure that people understand this rock bottom ideology. You don't have to hit rock bottom. We encourage people not to wait until they hit rock bottom.
I mean, during that 10-year period, like, did you ever reach out for help? Like, was there anyone that you like tried to talk to? And because I know your mother went to your aunt, and they didn't really help her, but was there anyone in your life that you searched out after university?
So, two things about that. One is I was living with a good partner, but he was very overwhelmed when he figured out what was going on with me. So when we were dating, I mean, he used drugs, but he used them like at the casual level, and so he thought I was like him. In fact, I did everything I could to convince him that I was like him. But then we moved in together and he realized I wasn't, and he didn't know what to do about it. Like he didn't understand. He really kind of thought I could stop like anytime I wanted. He didn't understand I might need help to do it. And
Well, there's no manual for that.
no, there isn't. And this is again the '90s. It wasn't as well known. I think today he would have had more information just sort of from the media. Um, but but also I did try to go to therapy a couple times when I was using. But I was never able to make any real progress in therapy because I was on drugs. It was sort of like the drugs were a barrier between me and my emotions, a barrier between me and even explaining my own history or understanding my own history. So I did try a couple times to get help, but it never really got very far.
Wow, I didn't. Yeah, so the drugs just stopped you from actually being able to communicate effectively what was going on in your body and in your mind and with your past.
And the therapist wasn't an expert in addiction. And so today there are therapists that have special training in treating addiction. And so you don't have to, and I say this, don't have to wait to get sober to get mental health treatment today. But you would want to find a therapist who is trained in addiction so that she could help you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. I've been lucky actually. I've had a few therapists and experts like who have dealt with addiction and depression and stuff like that. Been on the podcast as well, but again, nothing quite at the level of your own personal story. So, you come to this with real first world experience. Yeah.
Yes.
And so beyond therapists, I mean, was your family in play at all? Like aunts, uncles, grandmothers? Like, was there anyone that you were felt comfortable reaching out to during that 10-year kind of decline?
There was nobody I would reach out to about my drug use. No, I mean, first of all, I'm in California, and everybody else is, in New Jersey, or a lot of my family eventually moved to Arizona. So I didn't turn to any of my family or ask for help from them.
Was
No.
was that more isolating, or did you feel better about that,
About
having your family so far away?
well, I mean, definitely having my mother, and she left my stepfather, but having my mother far away was helpful.
Yeah.
I would not have wanted to live near her. I mean, I would like my sister and I are very close, and I have a loving relationship with my aunts, but not the kind of relationship where I thought they would understand what was going on. And plus, until you're ready to get help, you don't want to have a conversation about it, right? The conversation would happen when you might be ready to get help. And by 32, it was really like that cumulative thing I was talking about, being, trapped and debilitated and all that. And plus, my partner was finally ready to throw me out, and I couldn't hold a job. And so it was just all of that in combination where I finally was, ready to say, well, maybe I ought to go to rehab.
And had you tried rehab previous?
No.
So first time was 32.
Yes.
Yeah.
First time.
And I mean, was it a clinic that you had to stay in for like 30 days or 90 days or?
Yeah, so I didn't have any insurance because I hadn't been working regularly. I didn't have any cash, and I will say it makes it hard to find treatment even today. I mean, sometimes we talk drug policy like there's treatment on demand whenever people want it, and that's just not true. And it wasn't true for me. It took me a while to find a place that would take me, and then I was on a wait list. I had to call every Monday between 9 and noon to keep my name moving up the list, and if I missed a day, I would drop back down to the bottom of the list. So it was a whole process.
That's a lot of pressure for a drug abuser.
It is. And I was living in a safe and secure home. Imagine if you don't have that, benefit. And it still was hard for me to do it, but I did. And so it took me, I think, 2 months to find a place that I could actually get to and pay for. And then I was on the wait list for 10 weeks. So it was months between when I said maybe I should go to rehab until I was actually in rehab.
And do you think that made the rehab experience more valuable to you, or do you think that actually harmed you in your rehabilitation process? I'm just curious about like wait times and like what you were thinking during that period.
I'm still using the whole time. But the thing is that a lot of people don't make it through the end of those couple months, right? They aren't able to stick with the process all the way through to the end. But I did. But my rehab turned out to be problematic. Now, it was a longer term women's program, inpatient. And I'll say not everybody has to go inpatient, but when you have a severe addiction like I did, that's usually the right course. 30 days often isn't enough, but often that's all people can get. But mine was a 90-day minimum. So it was a longer term inpatient women's program that I went to. And in my mind, it's medical treatment, right? I'm going to go in for medical treatment. But when I got there, I found out right on the first day that my facility was adamantly and vehemently exclusively 12-step. And 12 steps is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the Anonymouses. And it's a good fit for many, but it's not a good fit for many other people. And it was a terrible fit for me. And so that was a real shocker to me. I didn't know that that's what I was walking into.
The 12-step process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it wasn't just that. It's that even when I raised concerns and told them why it wasn't a good fit, they insisted that there was no other way. This is the only way. They told me things like I was self-will, run amok, and my best thinking had gotten me there. And I'd always tell them, I promise you it wasn't my best thinking. So they kept trying to shut down my explanation as to why this was a poor fit. And they swore up and down that there was no other option.
How frustrating was that?
It was a shock. I wasn't expecting, but I believe them. I mean, these are the experts, right? They're the treatment counselors and the people who are running the program. So I thought that must be true. They swore it was true.
But you're highly intelligent. You got into Berkeley Law with a massive drug problem. Like, like clearly you can think for yourself. Like how frustrating might
It
that have been?
it was frustrating, but it was also terrifying because basically they told me verbally, explicitly, you're going to fail if you don't do everything we're telling you. You do it this way or you're going to fail. They said this to me repeatedly. And that was frightening because I couldn't do what they wanted me to do. I knew it wasn't going to work for me. So they say it's the only way. They say you're going to fail if you don't do it. And I can't do it. And so I really stood back, just sort of like, whoa, whoa, what am I going to do? But I decided, I thought about it and I said, I'm just going to keep my mind and my ears open and listen for the parts I can use and ignore everything else. I mean, I ignored like fundamental pillars of the 12 steps. But I did all the homework in rehab. I wrote what they want me to write. I read what they wanted me to read. I read the AA Big Book. I read the NA text. I was looking for parts I could use. I was always looking at it like, is there a core concept here that I think I can apply? And so that was how I tackled it. But I was still very afraid that they might be right. I mean, if the experts are right, then there's no hope for me, right? So that's a very scary place to be.
What were the first 30 days like of the inpatient rehab? I mean, like what was that withdrawal like for you?
I mean, I was really exhausted, and they don't let you sleep. But you have to stick to the schedule. And I'm not saying that's a negative thing, but there's a schedule, right? You got to get up at this time, eat breakfast at this time. It's very regimented. For 30 days, I wasn't allowed to have any visitors or leave the facility for the first 30 days. And I had roommates. And the thing about rehab is everybody's in early recovery. Everybody's coming off drugs. It's like living in a room with mean 12-year-olds. I mean, like if people aren't in the best emotional space. Their interpersonal skills are not good. We are all on edge and stressed out, and so it can be a emotionally volatile environment. And so I slept as much as I was allowed to sleep and tried to, but I also got sick. I had got bronchitis and an eye infection because again, my physical system was shot. But at the same time, the women, I felt, camaraderie, with a lot of the women. We had similar histories. We would talk amongst ourselves about our backgrounds. And so I was among a group of women that I felt mostly comfortable with. And we were all trying, to figure this out. So I still have relationships with two of the women from my rehab. I, in fact, just had lunch with them like 3 weeks ago. So
That's amazing. So I'm just curious, like how, like, it's hard to put a percentage on it or try to quantify it, but like if you had to, if you had to take the experience of the rehab facility and the professional rehab people that were working with you, plus the communication with the other patients that were there, like what part of that was most valuable to you? Like, did you get more from the rehab and the professionals that were there who were telling you this is our way or the highway, which seems a little rough, or were you getting more kind of support and more guidance from the other patients?
a lot of what I got was time off drugs. So, that was a big help just to for the first time in, many, many years, 15 years basically to be off of drugs. You start to gradually feel a little bit more normal, a little bit more connected, although it's also, probably, like I said, emotionally volatile. But they did teach us some things that were useful. I did start to really accept that I probably could never use drugs again, or my life is gonna end up just like it had been, and so I started to get the idea that maybe sobriety was gonna be the only path out for me, and that maybe it was real, that maybe it was actually a possibility for me. Because I didn't go to rehab thinking, "I'm gonna get sober." I went to rehab thinking, maybe I can figure out how to not do as many drugs. Maybe I can figure out how to do less, and so my life would be better. And it's not that I wanted to keep using it, was that I couldn't imagine stopping. Like that was just beyond it. So I did start to meet people who had succeeded despite having similar histories to mine, and that started to plant the idea that maybe this could be real for me. Um, and that was an important process to get started.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Like, I just can't imagine going to rehab and feeling so on edge, and trying to come off drugs and being surrounded by these other people who are also edgy and irritable, and then you're being told it's our way or the highway, and you're trapped. And then that's amazing that you kind of went to rehab thinking, okay, I'm a severe drug abuser, and now I just want to be a casual drug user, like, weekends and, whatever. And that was kind of like the option, but there's no way that that was ever going to happen, right?
Not for me.
Yeah.
I mean, we know now that there are some people who qualify under the test as having a substance use disorder, who some people can later moderate. But typically, those people are at the more mild to moderate level, and even for that group, not everyone can. But at my level of severity, the odds of me ever being able to use again without risk or problem were low. And for me, I believe that total abstinence is the only viable strategy. Yes.
And did you figure that strategy out while you were there?
I started to think that it might be a possibility, but I also, it wasn't that I felt confident that I could do it, but I started to think to see that other people had. And I mean, 12-step meetings, they weren't the best fit for me, but one of the things I did get out of them in the beginning was that at a 12-step meeting, their meeting format, the most common meeting format is where somebody tells their story in the beginning and then other people share. And so you would hear somebody, like, let's say a woman, tell her story, and she's got childhood physical and sexual abuse or sexual assault. She's been using drugs for 15 years. And now I'm looking at her, and she's got like a year or 2 years sober, and she looks healthy, and she has a job, and she's getting her finances in order, and she's, building good relationships. And it just starts to help you believe that it's possible. And early recovery is hard work. So having that hope of the possibility of success is important.
Yeah. And having like a real role model to try to emulate.
Yeah, although not necessarily emulate the way she did it, because she did it, the people I was meeting were doing it in a way that I knew wasn't going to be a good fit for me. And so when I got home from rehab, that's when I started finding other options, but at first I believed them, there was nothing else. But when I got home, and I was in rehab for 5 months, I was in a long time. When I got home, and I will emphasize even for you, now January of 94. There's no Google, okay? There's no Google. But I thought, is it really true that there's no other options? So I got my car and I drove to the library. And it turned out it wasn't true. Not even in 1994. And so I found other alternatives. I found Women for Sobriety, which still exists today. I actually speak at a lot of their conferences. I found the parent to what today is Smart Recovery, and the parent to what today is LifeRing Secular Recovery, and I'm on the board for LifeRing. And so that was huge for me because it was a great burden off of me to find that other people had successfully built robust recoveries using other programs, other philosophies, other structures, and those were better fits for me. They were more self-empowerment focused, more secular. I'm not a religious person, but also they were more like LifeRing is about building an individual recovery plan. They were more consistent with what I had been doing, which is that I got to be sort of the boss of my recovery.
Hmm. That's interesting because obviously you were quite a free thinking, intelligent human being. I mean, like, but obviously you got caught in this kind of like 10-year spiral of just going down. And I find it really interesting that after 5 years of rehab, you drove yourself to the library and you're like, well, I just went through something, but that can't be the only way. And I'm not done yet. Like, I need to figure out how I can, like you said, like be the boss of your recovery or somehow have more ownership over it.
Yes, I mean, and it was 5 months, not 5 years.
Oh, sorry, 5 months. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's what I was doing, but I didn't really think of it that way. Like, but I did to a degree. I thought I have to pick and choose which parts of this might work for me. These parts won't work. I can't do those things, or I don't think that's a good idea. Like, for example, 12 steps is very focused on turning over your will in your life and focusing on your defects. Neither of those seemed like great strategies to me. I wasn't going to turn over my will in my life. Again, I was self-will run amok. But so I had started looking at myself as the decision maker. But even when I found these other programs, I really approached them the same way. So I got the books for all those 3 new programs. I went to meetings for all those 3 new programs, but I just kept going this way I had with 12 steps, which is, I viewed all of it. And I mean, even what somebody might say during a cigarette break at a meeting, I viewed everything I was hearing as ideas that I should consider. Like, you are further along in the process than I am. You know more than I do, but you may not know what's right for me, but you know things that I don't know. And so I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to read about, and then I'm going to think about which parts do I want to try to apply to my program. And that's how I always thought about it from the beginning. And then when I found the more self-empowerment focused programs, that just reinforced that what I was doing was a viable approach. And that was a great relief to me to know that I wasn't doomed to fail because I wasn't doing it the 12-step way.
And how hard was it getting out of rehab after 5 months? And then I'm just making an assumption. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, did you have to cut a lot of people out of your life? Like, it's like, did you have any support systems or friends around that weren't using that you could rely on while you were trying to take this next kind of positive step in your life?
Well, my partner at the time, so he was really like done with me and ready to throw me out. Like, so when you're in rehab, they have these family meetings, where you talk with the therapist, my therapist. So he would come up and he would talk and he would say things like, I think it's too late. She's burned too many bridges. I can't trust her. But he did let me come home after rehab and he sort of waited to see, what was going to happen. And I will also say that I did use meth 3 times in my first 5 months. Perfect abstinence from day one happens, but it's rare. Look, 3 times in 5 months, that was pretty darn good after using pretty much every day for 10, 15 years, right? So I had him and we had a lot of work to do. We had to start couples counseling. When I got home, I started trauma therapy and we started couples counseling. Took a long time, probably over a year before I was fairly confident we might actually the relationship might survive it. It took quite a while, but he's a good man. He wasn't creating problems. He just wasn't ready to trust me or, agree to stay with me. My drug friends, I really had isolated a lot anyway through the later years. I was mostly talking to people on the phone. I didn't see people a lot. But certainly all of us in early recovery have to make choices about who we can have around us. And it's not just drug users, it can be family. Is your family supportive or are they pushing buttons or are they so stressed out because of your drug use that their anxiety level is, making it hard for you to be around them or whatever it might be. So we all have to make choices about relationships. Some have to be terminated, some have to be put on pause. Some people maybe you can text with them or talk them on the phone, but you can't be with them in person for a while. So those are important decisions that we all have to make.
Yeah, because I think that would be the hardest thing. Because like because there would be people around you that would trigger you to bring back memories that would make you want to use drugs or something like that. I'm just speaking kind of off the cuff without knowing really. I don't have any personal experience around this, but you'd have to really change kind of everything in your outside life after 5 months of being, you know, in that rehab center. You'd have to come out and restructure everything to make it less triggering, to make you not even want to go back down that path.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, I was using meth all the time. I rarely drank, but for the first 2 years, I had my now husband clear the alcohol out of the house because I didn't want an impulse relapse. I mean, I at least wanted to have to get in the car and drive to the store. So even though it wasn't my number one issue, it was actually the most likely way I was going to relapse is I would get upset about something and I would turn to the alcohol that was in the house. Like that would be step one. So I had him clean out the alcohol for 2 years. And after 2 years, I said, okay, I think it's safe to bring it back now. And he did, and I was able to handle it. So there are all of those kind of decisions, but definitely people, definitely people. I mean, what you're going to learn is who are my real friends. Who do I even like
Mhm.
sober? Like, people that you, let's say, drink with a lot and everybody goes out and gets really drunk. It's when you're sober, they're actually not as interesting as they think they are, right?
And you're not as interesting as you think you are.
Oh, they're
Yeah.
not as much fun as they seem to be when you're not drinking. So there are people like that, but some of them maybe you do have a real friendship with. And maybe what you have to do is, well, I'm not going to go to the bar with them. We have to start going to coffee or, doing something else. So it's an important filtering process that you have to go through in early recovery.
I think that's the hardest, maybe the hardest part is reorganizing your sober life.
Yes. Well, and the other thing is you have to have things to fill the time that you used to spend using drugs. You need to have activities to fill the time. And so for me, I actually, for the first 18 months, every day of the week, I either went to, so I had couples counseling with my husband and I I knew my trauma was underneath my drug use. So as soon as I got home from rehab, I found a therapist who was an expert in trauma and started working with her. So one night a week for couples, one night a week for trauma, 5 nights a week, I went to one of my meetings. I mixed it up with different programs, but I went to a meeting to stay busy every evening. On the weekend, I had something recovery related to do to keep focused. But also, you have to start thinking about, what do I actually enjoy doing? How do I want to spend my time? Because if it's all negative, it's going to be harder to stay sober. So, what do I remember what I used to like? Do I like going to the movies? I don't know. Do I like going to the movies? Getting some physical activity can be important. It helps release endorphins and helps you start to feel healthier. So there's a lot of things that have to. There's the what can I do, but there's also what do I actually want to do that I haven't been doing because I've been spending so much of my time and money on drugs.
Was it helpful or harmful for you to stack up all of these issues that you were going through and try to solve them or process them all at the same time? Like, you've just come out of rehab and you're like, okay, I want to make my relationship better, so I'm going to start couples counseling. It's like, whoa, maybe just work on substance abuse. Like, now you're working on couples there. And okay, trauma, you've got trauma, terrible trauma from your childhood and from your university years. Like, you want to tackle that right now at the same time you're dealing with your substance abuse. But you're right, it's kind of all connected. So, like, was it easier kind of dealing with all three of those issues at the same time? Because I'm curious, like, maybe someone out there right now is thinking, like, I just want to do with one thing at a time and just try to get by. But if one thing triggers the other thing, triggers the other thing, maybe it's better to do them all at once.
So, trauma and untreated mental health are by far the two most common avenues into a drug addiction, especially when you have a substance problem in your teens or early 20s. So, over half, between 55 and 70% of the people, when they get sober, they also have another mental health condition, whether it's anxiety or PTSD or whatever. When I got sober, they told us, don't work on that for the first 6 months to a year. But today we know that is the wrong answer. So today, based on a lot of studies and data and, tracking people, that's called dual diagnosis or co-occurring disorder. And you should be treated for both from day one. So anybody who goes into a addiction recovery program should be evaluated before they get there for what other mental health disorders they might have and receive treatment from the beginning. And I will also say to that point, one of the things that really is upsetting to me is sometimes a person, like when I speak or or through my website or whatever, they'll send me a message. Either the family or the person who has the addiction will say to me, oh, let's say my daughter, she's tried everything. She's been to rehab 8 times. And when I ask questions, what I find is that their daughter was offered the same treatment 8 times. She was never given an individualized assessment or treatment for her co-occurring depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder. She was never offered treatment that lasted longer than 30 days. She was never offered any help for, her trauma from being unhoused or any of it. And so it's aggravating that a lot of people think they're failing recovery when they're not actually being offered what is going to make them have a much, much better chance of success at recovery. And that is to be treated for both from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, just doing the same thing 8 times in a row and failing and not thinking at any stage, hey, maybe we need to switch this up.
Right.
That's a failure of the parents, really, too, isn't it?
It's a fear of the treatment system more, though. They're the experts, right? I mean,
Yeah.
treatment facilities should be doing it. I mean, people get so overwhelmed. It's so hard to evaluate what's a good treatment program and what's not a good treatment program. It's a very common question I get asked. How do I tell what's a good program and what's not? We don't have very good regulation. We don't have very good access to information about what a program really does. They all use certain magical phrase. They claim they're evidence-based. Some of them are, some of them aren't, and so it's really hard for people outside of the industry to understand what a robust evidence-based treatment program looks like.
And there's nothing standardized.
No, there's nothing standard. I mean, I wouldn't want it so standard that nobody can change it up, and it shouldn't be standardized in the sense that different people need different things, but it should be standardized in the sense of let's do an assessment about you, what you need. And if you failed, let's say even once, but especially twice at a 30-day program, certainly somebody should be thinking about maybe you need more than 30 days. I mean, that should be a question that's on the table and discussed. Or what kind of treatment were you given? If that type of treatment isn't working, maybe we need to add EMDR, which is for PTSD, or some other treatment that we didn't give you. Let's try to do more. I mean, anytime, even in a recovery support meeting, when someone's relapsing, my suggestion to them always is, what can you add to your program to strengthen it? I mean, that's just a normal question if somebody's not succeeding. And yet these treatment programs aren't doing that when people are coming to them for the third or fourth time.
And the key to that is, from what you've said already, the key to that is understanding what the underlying issues are that led you into that substance abuse. So like for you, it was your trauma. So you can't really deal with the substance abuse without also dealing with the trauma. So if people are failing at rehab again and again and again, it's the underlying issues maybe that aren't being dealt with. Would you make that suggestion?
It is often the underlying. It's also why, like, what you hear is how people switch addictions. And if let's say somebody actually did get sober, but now they've got a gaming, problem, or a shopping problem, or gambling, or whatever it might be. Usually, what that indicates is that what was underneath the addiction hasn't been resolved, and so they're still feeding the same emotional needs. They're just doing it a different way.
What's a common, I mean, what, like, can we talk about maybe like what's a common way? So if you're hooked on heroin, for example, and you go to a treatment center and you manage to get off heroin, but then you're, like you said, like addicted to gambling, you've just kind of converted that addiction into something else that gives you a similar kind of rush,
Yes.
which is equally unhealthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I would rather probably have a gambling problem than a heroin problem, but gambling can lead to all kinds of horrible life consequences. I mean, my mother had a gambling problem. My grandfather had a gambling problem, and my mother went bankrupt 3 times. It was always chaotic financially around her. So yes, and so then it's got to be about what's going on underneath. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people do get addicted just from frequency of use. It is possible to get addicted to, let's say, pain pills, from being on pain pills, and it sort of triggers something in your brain that you want them at an excessive level.
Oh, the opioid crisis is huge.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I will also distinguish between dependence and addiction. And so let's just take pain pills. So somebody who is got, let's say, chronic pain of some kind, back or whatever it might be, they're going to, if they're given opiates long term for their chronic pain, they will be physically dependent on it. But the definition of addiction, the base definition that applies to all types, is, are you continuing to do it despite notable negative consequences? That's like the fundamental key idea of addiction. That's when it's an addiction. We use the word addiction casually. Oh, I'm addicted to, this or that. But no, are you continuing to do it despite notable negative consequences? That's the key. So for somebody who's got chronic pain and they're taking, let's say, opiates, they may be physically dependent that they have to wean down because they're going to go through a withdrawal. But if it's not giving them notable negative consequences, but in fact is improving their life, it's not an addiction. It's just a physical dependence. And I say that because people get confused sometimes, or they think that their loved one is addicted because they've been on pain meds for a long time when they have chronic pain. It's about how is it impacting their life.
hmm And it really does. So if something really does have to affect you negatively again and again, and then you have to keep coming back to that drug.
Yes, if you are willing to do it despite those notable negative consequences, that's when we would categorize you as having a substance use disorder or other type of behavioral disorder.
Interesting. Okay. What if there's no negative effects and you just love it and you're using it all the time? Like, I'm curious, like, what if you are, so for example, your meth situation after you graduated university, every job you got was worse, every payment you got was worse, every employment period was shorter. You were clearly hurting yourself and your future opportunities. Is there anything like a high functioning drug addict that actually might be addicted to a substance, but actually doesn't suffer like the same similar kinds of consequences? Like, I'm thinking of a high performance athlete, or maybe like you hear stories about Wall Street, investors and bankers being substance abusive, but they're highly functioning. Like, does it are there rules for that, or are there situations where that would happen, or do you kind of see it all as just being on a similar timeline, where if it doesn't happen to you in the first 6 months, it's going to happen to you in the first 3 years, where you will have this kind of massive decline?
So, I will say this way: somebody might be high functioning, let's say, at their job, but are they high functioning in all the other areas of their life? Like, are they high functioning in their relationships? So they're high functioning in their health. Are they high functioning that they're actually spending their time, money, and energy doing the things that they want to do?
Right.
So you could be high functioning in one little area. It doesn't necessarily mean there aren't consequences elsewhere. But also, uh, I would never say it's impossible for someone to, let's say, use meth or cocaine on a regular basis at a high level and not and be without notable negative consequences. I would never say it's not possible. It's highly unlikely, especially if you look at the bigger picture. If somebody's using meth, once or twice a week, and they actually, go to sleep, and it's, there are a lot of people who 80% of people use all drugs in moderation, including stimulants, including even opioids and other drugs. That's how most people use them.
Mhm.
High functioning, part of it's going to be how long does that last, but also what are they paying the price for in the other areas of their life, even if they're able to maintain that one area.
Right. And again, too, you mentioned that spectrum, like low, moderate, severe, right? So
Correct.
you might have a low impact drug user who's not really getting addicted, but enjoys it casually and something like that. But then, the severe people, like you said, that 20% that go down the rabbit hole.
No, it's 20% that are low, moderate, or severe on the substance use disorder spectrum. It's only 20% that satisfy the criteria for having a substance use disorder at all. 80% of the people who use drugs don't meet the minimum criteria for mild substance use disorder, for mild addiction. Most people who use cannabis or ketamine or pills or whatever it is, they use them on a intermittent, irregular, not, everyday extensive basis. They use them casually. They use them to party with their friends. They use them because they have a final coming up and they want to study. So somebody give them some ADHD meds or whatever it might be. They don't use them at a problematic level. The 20% includes from the mild substance use disorder level to the severe.
Okay.
But you are right that where you were talking about your high functioning guy, it can be a question about where do they fall on the spectrum. Maybe they're at the more mild, because the more consequences is going to push you into the more severe level. Yes.
Right. Okay. So you come out of 5 months of rehab. You reorganize your life. You're keeping yourself busy with all of these different support groups. You're dealing with your trauma. You're dealing with your relationship at the time. What does the next 10 years look like for you as you pull yourself out?
Well, I will say that my substance recovery was faster than my trauma recovery because it was the trauma side was more complicated and it was first, right? It was older. But and it was a gradual progression. Like by 2.5 years of sober, I really didn't struggle with my addiction after that. But I was in trauma therapy for like 9 years. But on the other side of it, I was also rebuilding myself professionally, right? So when I got home from rehab, I had a Berkeley degree, I had good grades, and I had an embarrassing resume, okay? So nobody was hiring me for a career job, but I just wasn't ready. Look, I'm 32. I feel old. I've wasted my education. I've wasted my life up to that. But there is this impulse to sort of leap ahead. Like I want everything fixed like in a year. I want it to be like it never happened. But that isn't the way it was gonna work for me, that considering where I started and how much of my life I had destroyed. So my first job when I got home from rehab was a part-time, low-level temporary admin job because literally for me to get up every day and go to work on time and stay all the hours and not leave in the middle of the day or something and do a good job, like that, I needed to sort of get in the habit of doing that. I hadn't been disciplined since college 10 years earlier, and so it was a process for me to sort of start rebuilding myself professionally.
Was there any stigma, about having that 10-year gap in your resume of stuff that you weren't really proud of or happy with? Like, did you have to, communicate about your drug addiction and your rehab time? Like, and I'm just curious if that held you back and how kind of open you were about that.
I didn't never communicate. I mean, I would stretch dates on my resume and that kind of thing. But when I started with part-time work, there's they're not as focused on any gaps in your resume as they would be for a permanent job. So I did that job for 6 months, and by the time I was looking for a permanent job, I at least had a 6 month, track record, right? That I could, and I started at a sort of a mid-level administrative job full time. So I wasn't leaping from that low-level job up. I was leaving, just a little bit up, but not a leap. And then I gradually worked my way sort of into middle management. And then at 6 years, I went to Berkeley Law. But I never revealed my drug use to an employer. And in fact, even when I took the bar, so I went to Berkeley Law when I was 39. I graduated when I was 42. By by the time I graduate and I'm getting licensed by the California Bar Association, They don't. They in the California bar does not ask you, have you ever used drugs? Okay, they get way too many yeses. Like that is not the question. Okay,
In California, that's like a 90% yes. Yeah.
no, they don't. That's not how they ask it, right? They ask in the past 5 years, have you used illicit substances or had a problem with any substance? It's something like that. And by then I had 9 years sober. So they're asking about 5 and I have 9. And then when I worked at a really big law firm for a few years, and then I went to work for the federal government. I led class actions for the federal government, and they asked about 7 years, and I had 14 years. And then when I became a federal judge, because I was appointed a federal administrative law judge at 20 years sober, well, I was 20 years sober. They asked about 10 years, and I had 20. And so I never had to disclose it based on what somebody was asking me. I was able to tell the truth and tell them nothing at the same time, so it worked out.
But you've been so open with it, like in the last decade or so. Like I mean, have you ever had any fears about having that come back at you professionally?
I'm retired.
Oh, so that's when you started?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So once I was well, and I did disclose when I was a judge, when I joined the board for LifeRing, Secular Recovery, and for She Recovers, that's considered an outside activity, so I had to run it through ethics. So the first time I told an employer was then, but it was very generic. It was like, oh, I've got 23 years sober. I'm going to join this board. Here's what I'm going to do. Please approve. And so they did, but I didn't give them details, and they didn't ask me for details. It wasn't really relevant. But when I retired, that was really the time for me to think about how can I use my sort of new found freedom that I don't have to worry about professional repercussions anymore. How can I use that to be of service, in a new way? And so I had been working on my memoir while I was a judge. It was sort of a hobby. I was working on writing the book. And I wasn't even really sure if I'd ever finish it. But I also started, writing opinion pieces. Like I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal not long after I stopped working, and the LA Times. I've had a piece, different things like that. And I started speaking openly. And it's being retired and having that former judge title has offered me an opportunity to sort of capture people's attention. And I try to use it to educate, to share information that I think is important, to use my story sort of to reduce stigma and to give hope to people that recovery is possible and all of that. But it really has only been in the last 5 years since I stopped working.
It's incredible to me, though, that you had to turn down Berkeley Law at 22 because you were so messed up, and that you went back at 39, like 9 years sober or whatever.
Yeah, 16 years later, I went to Berkeley. I actually went to law school. Like,
That's incredible. Like that's such a journey.
it was, and Berkeley did not take me back right away, by the way. So I applied, and Berkeley, I was living in Silicon Valley, and so I was only looking at Bay Area law schools. And Berkeley didn't take me back, so I went to Hastings, which is in San Francisco, and it's a good law school, but it's not, top 10. But I was number 3 in my class of 400 at Hastings. And so then Berkeley took me back, and I graduated from there.
What was that like, kind of completing that circle?
It was a great moment of joy. I mean, it was really like a cherry on the top of the cake, right? And so it was wonderful to have gotten something back that I thought I never would get back. But it was, 16 years later. And I will also say that professional side, the judge thing, I mean, I'm proud of all that. I mean, these were major accomplishments. And getting back to law school and getting the judge, it's an indicator of sort of the robustness of my recovery, right? That I could do that. But professional accomplishment's not really sort of the crux or the most important part of recovery. I mean, for me, the joy of the recovery is sort of the lack of that chaos, the lack of living in insanity, the ability to be like a real partner to my husband, and show up for your birthday party, show up for your party, behave appropriately with a gift, it's like a whole new world. To be a good aunt for my nieces and nephew, now to be able to be of service. And so the professional side, I worked hard for that, and I worked a long time for that, and I'm proud of it. But on a day-to-day basis, it's sort of it's that my mind and my emotional energy are not just caught up in that chaos and that obsession, and I can use all of that for things that I actually enjoy and that actually have value.
I think a lot of people probably don't think that they could come out of recovery and step into something that's as high pressure as being like a legal professional, because maybe they think like, oh, if I go back into that kind of high pressure situation, maybe I'll relapse. So maybe they aim for lower hanging fruit or something like that, thinking that maybe isn't for them because they're afraid of relapsing. Is that like an issue that some people might deal with? Because to go right back into Berkeley Law, I mean, you would have had to be very confident in your recovery that you can deal with that stress without having, feeling like you were going to relapse.
That's true, and I also had to feel, confident enough to even apply, to face what I had lost, to face what I had given up. But I will also say, this is you're actually offering me a window to share positive data, right? So we hear, I think, people hear a lot of negatives about recovery, about the likelihood of recovery. Oh, only 10% of people succeed at rehab, or 15%, or whatever. But those low data points are really about each effort. In their lifetime, 75% of the people who have an addiction at one point will recover. And the other really strong positive data point is that once you hit 5 years of continuous sobriety, you have an 85% chance of never relapsing again. So in recovery, time is on your side. And so most people, by the time they get, I mean, I went to Berkeley Law at 6.5 years sober. I was feeling pretty, solid in my sobriety recovery. And I think most of us at that point are.
Hmm. I mean, and as you moved through your recovery and as you added a year behind you, a year behind you, and started building up to 5 years, 10 years, and things like that, how conscious were you at every one of those steps to continue just avoiding potential like negative influences? Like, was that always kind of on your back burner? Like, oh, that, going down that path might trigger me, or, excuse me, or staying away from these kind of people, might bring me back into that space again? Or were you just kind of straightforward, purely confident?
It's more that your life is focused other places. And so people that are doing drugs aren't going to really interest you anymore. They're not able to be, I mean, like I couldn't be a good friend when I was in the midst of that. They're not going to be able to be a good friend to me. They're not going to be able to do anything interesting or have really insightful, deep conversations about the things that I'm interested in. So it's not attractive. But I will also say that for me, I I don't I haven't really felt at risk from my sobriety, really, honestly, in 28 of the last 31 years. But I don't play around either. Like, I really do feel strongly that for me to pick up anything is a high risk. Like, sometimes people say to me, they say, "Well, you've got 31 years of sobriety. Can't you have a beer?" And it's not that I think the world would explode if I had a beer, but what I really believe would happen is the negotiation would start. How often could I have a beer and it's not a problem? If I can have a beer, I could smoke some weed, right?
Mm.
What if I just did meth on my birthday? Like,
Birthday met.
this is where I mean, I really think that's where my mind would go. And so I don't want to have to fight that battle again. I don't want to have to fight the battle of getting my mind to stop doing that. And so I don't open the door. And
Well, being a professional litigator, like that's actually, you're compromising all the time with yourself, right? Like you're trying to avoid that, but it almost seems like your mind is geared towards that. Like, I can do meth on my birthday, just that'd be fine, right? Like you're trying to convince yourself or bargain with yourself that somehow that'll be acceptable.
yes,
Yeah.
I mean, I really think that's where it would go. I there is so much risk and so nothing to gain. I mean, in early recovery, it feels like you're giving up a lot, to have to stay sober, to not be able to go to the bar with your friends all the time, or, get high with your people or whatever. It feels like a major loss. But over time, that loss starts to look less and less important, and what you're gaining hopefully is bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the value calculus goes down, because one of the things that addiction does to your brain is that you're focused on short-term benefit. You're not able to really do good long-term planning. But with sobriety, as your brain gets clearer, I mean, the other thing I'll say is your brain heals, right? We hear a lot about how addiction rewires the brain, but recovery rewires the brain too. And so that same neuroplasticity process is to your advantage in recovery. And so over time, you're just focused in different areas, and that there's no attractiveness to losing what you have. If people like, for me, if it were ever to happen, the only thing I can really imagine is if I needed to take pain meds or something for a long time and I somehow lost control. Like, I can't see it happening any other way at this point. And even then it's unlikely, but I can't see it happening any other way. It's not of interest. The things that I have, everything that I have, all the positives, all the joy of my life, the happy days, the productive days, the feeling useful, all of that is from a foundation of sobriety, and I'm not willing to take any risk to lose that.
Because your addiction seemed to be rooted in trauma and physical violence and sexual violence and things like that. How nervous were you as you were trying to get sober and you came out of rehab and you were trying to kind of rebuild your life, how conscious were you of getting back into a similar habit or situation with a man again that would might lead you down that path again? Because it seems like that was maybe the real trigger to all of this. And I just wonder, like, how aware you were as you were trying to kind of dig yourself out of that hole.
Well, I was already with my partner, right? We had been together for years before I went to rehab, and like I said, he's basically a good guy. My complaint with him was that I felt like he didn't step up to help me as much, but he didn't really understand how to do it. But he was at a fundamental level, he was a good partner. Now we had things to work out. I mean, we our communication skills were not great, and a lot that was both of us. But when I got sober, my interpersonal skills were crap. Like I couldn't listen. I was very verbally aggressive. I could get triggered and yell easily, or be just mean and treat people badly. So I wasn't really looking for a male partner. So that wasn't. It was more about how do I try to make this one work because this is actually a pretty good. Like if we can make this work, I'd be lucky to be able to make this work and stay in this relationship. So I didn't have that sort of problem with it. But the trauma did interfere with things like trust, right? Like it took me a long time to really trust that he was going to be to trust that when he said things, if they could be interpreted a bad way or a good way, that I trusted him enough to interpret it the good way and not, necessarily think it was something that was coming from a negative place. So there was a lot of building. I wouldn't even say rebuilding, but building anew for both of us, growth within the relationship, learning how to be a healthy and supportive couple and get our needs met in the relationship. There was a lot of work around that. But it wasn't like I was out there dating and, trying to start something new with people who I didn't really know if they could be trusted at even a fundamental level.
Right, because I feel like that would be really scary.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that would be really scary. But it comes up in a lot more than that. Like for example, with bosses, like let's say when I'm working in my early recovery, when I'm still being easily triggered, I grew up in a place where I didn't trust. So my PTSD, and when I went into trauma therapy, that's what I was diagnosed with, which surprised me because I didn't know you could have PTSD and not be a war vet, right? But for me, it showed up as very severe anxiety. And so for many years in my sobriety, I lived in a constant state of terror, a constant state of anxiety, a constant state of fear. I always was waiting, even when things were going well today, I always was waiting for if I make one little mistake or even not a mistake, but any little thing can happen and I'm going to lose it all. Like it's going to explode. Like God forbid a boss, should say, "Hey, Mary Beth, stop by and talk later." Like in my mind, I'm getting fired. What did I do? I'm going back to it all. I used to leave myself voicemails at work. Like if I got home and I was thinking about what I might have done something that they might think I did wrong, and I leave myself messages explaining my behavior. I would get into work sometimes and have 6 voicemails from me, like, I was in a high state of stress, so that trauma showed up in things like, not feeling comfortable that I was gonna be fairly evaluated or fairly judged, or that I was gonna get to keep anything that I had. My husband used to call me the "what about tomorrow girl," because so it showed up. It just didn't show up in sort of my dating life because I didn't have that, but it showed up in a lot of other relationships. It showed up in a lot of other behaviors. I could be really mean if you frustrated me or you weren't doing what I thought you should be doing. I mean, I my behavior took a long time to get under, um, to a point where I was treating people the way they deserve to be treated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what was it like kind of coming out of rehab and then kind of having to be an adult for the first time? Because if you think about it, and I'm just kind of reflecting on your timeline, you had a 3-year period at university where you were managing your drug addiction, but you hadn't kind of gone off the rails. And then your senior year, you had some terrible things happen to you, and you relapsed and back on meth. So from 22, your senior year, to when you got sober, you kind of didn't have to integrate into society. You didn't have to be an adult. You didn't have to deal with people and things and situations at that level. So then now you're sober, and all of a sudden, like, you have to be a functional member of society for really the first time in your life because you were just a kid when all this craziness happened. Like, what was that like?
It was difficult. I mean, it was difficult to navigate personalities and things that were going on. It was difficult to do things like, pay my bills every month. I was just used to sort of juggling things or being on the edge. But mostly it was difficult to feel safe enough in myself that I could actually sort of connect with people or get things done in a real way. My anxiety prevented me from actually enjoying the good things that I was doing because I was always feeling so fearful of what might happen next. And that showed up in the way I interacted with the world. It showed up a lot in the way I interacted with the world. And I also still did have to deal with like my family. My mother was causing me problems a lot and wanting things for me. Now that I was working, she wanted money because she had a gambling problem. But trying to navigate relationships and figure out what are they gonna be. My best friend was still in the middle of her active addiction. In fact, she died a few years after I got sober. So there were there's a lot of things going on at once. I'm trying to rebuild myself professionally. Doc and I, as you said a lot, Doc and I are trying to see if we can survive. I'm working on my trauma. I'm trying to navigate how to deal with people, customer service people, the lady behind the counter, my boss, the people that are, reporting to me or that I interact. There's a lot of things going on that you're trying to figure out, and you're not going to be good at all of them at once.
And for the first time.
Yes, for
Yeah.
the first time.
Because most people have their 20s to figure out how to deal with fucking shitty people and how to deal with relatives and all this kind of stuff. But you kind of, it's almost like you went into a dark hole for a decade or a little bit more and then came out and then you, all of a sudden you had to figure out how to live with all this stuff again. I would find that really the biggest challenge maybe to sobriety and not relapsing.
Well, part of it for me when I got home from rehab, one of the things I did was I actually made a list of everything I needed to work on, and it turned out it wasn't a comprehensive list, but it was long. But I really did, as part of my plan, decide, you know what, I cannot possibly work on all these things at once. I have to prioritize. Like, you can't work on 12 things at the same time. You really can't. So some of the things that weren't going great, I really couldn't focus on them. I just had to let them go because I can't fix everything at the same time. And so I sat down and I said, all right, here's my 5 priorities right now. It's my sobriety, my trauma work, my relationship with Doc, trying to get back to work, and trying to get my finances under control. And everything else I dealt with as I could, but those were my top 5 priorities because I knew I couldn't split my attention. I could only split my attention so far. And so there were things that weren't going great that I just had to just ignore or let them go or try to manage as best I could without giving them the focused attention that I was able to later give them. And so that was part of it. And there's a lot of things trailing you. Like I had a lot of debt and a lot of financial issues that I was trying to resolve. And y- worried about I'm friends and family of people that are struggling with addiction too. When you get sober, you start worrying about the people that you love. They're still stuck in that misery, right? So there is a lot going on. It's a lot to manage. It's why most people need some kind of professional help. It's why most people like peer support meetings for their sobriety, whether it's 12 steps or LifeRing or whatever, because it can be really helpful to have other supports, and especially other people that have either been through it or know how to help you get through it better. Like, people in the meetings, a lot of them have been through similar things, and you can talk about your stresses with your family or worrying about work or whatever, and they understand. And the professionals can help you maybe see things in a bigger perspective or heal the wounds that are underneath it. But it's a complex process. It is a complex process.
And did you have, I mean, you mentioned you sorted, you kind of, you searched out a various amount of groups and you found other ways of finding support and things like that. Did you happen to have, and I know it's not crucial for recovering, but did you have like one sponsor or one mentor that kind of was with you the whole way through from kind of coming out of rehab to kind of getting back into law school, which I kind of see as this kind of, are you closing that circle? Like, was there some singular figure that was kind of with you that whole time, or were you able to get what you needed from a variety of different people or different support groups?
So I never had a sponsor. Only 12 Steps really has sponsors, and there's pros and cons to that. But I will say the one consistent figure was my now husband. That was the one. That doesn't mean he was always able to be supportive or always able to understand, but he was always he 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 was always there, and trying, which wasn't something I was used to. And he was also not really creating chaos, and he was noticing my progress. I mean, I had trouble noticing my progress. Like for me, my mind was negatively focused. what mistakes was I making? What were my imperfections? What could I, should have, would have had? I mean, I was always focused on the negative. And so he would sometimes point out to me, well, hey, look what you did this, or that's so much better, or whatever. And I had to teach myself to pause every once in a while and look back and see my progress, to really start to notice it and appreciate it, and also to help me feel a little less anxious because I could see I was on a positive, forward momentum, and that I hadn't sort of peaked yet, that I was still on an uphill. So there were a lot of those kind of strategies. And then I was in individual therapy for 3 years, but then I went into a group therapy with women with trauma histories, and that was a whole sort of new level of understanding and healing because they were further along in the process, and they were tying their current behaviors and reactions back to their trauma in ways I didn't yet understand. And seeing that modeled for me, seeing that help me understand my own, like, I thought certain of my behaviors were just, well, that's just who I am. Like, I'm just crazy Mary Beth. This is I do things, ridiculous things. And but with them I started to see, no, actually it ties back. And so understanding that helped me heal from it in a more effective way. And so to start to improve the behavior. But also a lot of it was progressive. Like, even when I started to see things like how badly I could treat people sometimes, I mean, there was a customer service lady on the phone one time I will never forget. And I don't even know who she was or what it was about, but I remember that she said to me, "I'm sorry, I'm trying the best I can." And I said, "That's what's so pathetic."
Wow. Okay.
I mean, my behavior could be bad, but even when I saw it, it was not like a light switch, like I can stop right away, right? Like, it was always progressive. Like, I could start to do better in the more emotionally neutral situations, but not if it got emotional. And then gradually I got better and better control over it. And so part of it was having um, to be compassionate to myself and not expect faster improvement than what was realistic, which was hard, because you want to do better and you want to do better now and you want to fix everything today. And that just isn't the way it was going to happen.
Also think too, like, we're in a lot of ways we're our worst critics, and
Yes.
we're the hardest on ourselves, right? And sometimes we got to let up on ourselves, and it's nice to have someone around you that can see through your own harsh, you know, um, we're not objective at looking at our own performance, right? So it's nice to have someone who's a little bit nicer, and having that third set of eyes, or that second set of eyes looking at us to kind of talk us back from harsh negativity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I will say he was good with things too, like with my relationship with my mother. I would say to him, "Am I being fair? Am I handling this right?" To get that second set of eyes and that input. And that's really useful.
So, I mean, how has it been now with a book out in the world, and with you? This is, just from talking to you for this last little bit. I mean, it's almost like you're in like a third chapter. Like you started off with trauma from childbirth, and then you've fallen into drug addiction, sobriety, and now you're kind of giving back, if like a fourth chapter. Like, what's that process been like, sharing your story?
So I really thought hard, for example, about the book, about how to make it useful. Like, I didn't want to write a memoir that was out there 22 times already. And so I tried to structure it in a way that would help people understand things a little better, how it plays out. And so the first third is that, like, pre-drug childhood, and then the drug addiction. And then the last third is my first 3 years of recovery, to sort of show a more realistic example, but also that individualized approach. But so that writing the book was, it's challenging because when you write a memoir, you have to really dig deep into the scene and what really happened and sort of re-experience it in a way, and that can be challenging. But it also did help me release some second guessing of myself. Like, during that 6-hour rape, there was something that happened that I really second guessed my own choice, like, over and over and over again. And when I wrote it for the memoir, it became clear to me that no, actually, there wasn't even a real choice there. Like, I did the only thing that could be done, and that helped release some of that emotional energy. And I also enjoyed it because writing a memoir is very different than legal writing. So I was learning how to do something new, and I like to learn how to do new things. But also the opinion pieces and the speaking. I do continuing legal ed training for lawyers and judges. I do a lot of different types of workshops, and I get to talk to a lot of different people. And so I thought about it. Okay, well, now I can be open in the recovery space. What role do I want? And part of the nice part about being retired is I can think, what do I like doing? How can I take what I like doing and use do those things in the recovery space to hopefully, do something that's going to be helpful. And so that's sort of how I thought about it. So it is rewarding. It's part-time, which is nice. I get to choose what I do and don't do, which is nice. It's not the weight of being a lawyer or a judge on your shoulders. But it's engaging, and it's nice to feel that I'm at least, sharing information that people might not know, and that might give them some um, path forward or some greater understanding. But to stay engaged in the community and sort of be part of the conversation and be a resource for people if they need it. Yeah.
Well, it's definitely an uplifting story. Like I think that people, like I said, like I asked you if you had a mentor or you had a sponsor, someone like that, it's like a guiding light that you could focus on. And I think maybe that you have the chance to provide that to other people now.
That is part of the hope to offer the reassurance. I mean, look, I was 32 years old. I had a very extensive trauma history and a very long drug addiction to meth, which a lot of people don't think you can recover from at all, which is why I own up to shooting it. And I didn't just get sober, but I built a, robust and happy life. And so I hope that is a sign that it's not too late for anybody. And also a reminder that who your loved one will be if they can get recovery is very different than where they are right now. That their future can be very open to a lot of different positive possibilities. And it's just going to be, it just might take somebody giving them the help that they need, like the right help at the right time that might take it for them to get there.
Yeah. Is there anything today that we haven't talked about that you wanted to touch on?
Um, the only thing I'll say is that, if people have any questions, or they can always reach out to me through my website, which is junkietoJudge.com. And the one other thing I will say is,
Sorry, what's that URL? When you wrote me right away and you was like from junkie to judge, I was like, I must speak with this woman. This is gonna be a great conversation.
so my website is junkietoJudge.com. I always tell people you can forget my name. Just remember the Junkie Judge. Google exists now. I am very Googleable. But the one thing I will mention that we didn't directly talk about is for friends and family. If you have a loved one that's struggling with addiction, that tough love idea is actually not, it doesn't work well. So for friends and family, I would really recommend that they get the book called Beyond Addiction that's on Amazon. It's about craft techniques, which is the modern evidence-based approach, community reinforcement, and family training. But the Beyond Addiction book, I think it's the best book out there for friends and family to understand what's going on and what role they can play to help the ball sort of move forward in a positive way.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great because I think again, because each situation is so individual and the recovery is so individual and the process, if you're a friend or a family trying to think there's a one-off solution to
Right.
any of this, you're lost completely.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But also, you are going through something traumatic yourself. I mean, to love someone who's struggling with a substance use disorder is painful.
Or
Right.
God forbid a child.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And so part of what the book talks about is the need for self-care, and that can be really important as well. But yeah, I always want to make sure that, because a lot of who I hear from are friends and family, and I want to make sure they have a resource that they can turn to.
And what was the name of that book?
Beyond Addiction.
And
It's on Amazon and all the usual sites.
what was the name of your book?
From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for swinging by today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's been great.
It's been wonderful. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of your stay here in LA.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we're out. How do we do this now? Fade to black. It's been